everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a response to the Orchid Tag series of videos, and this was started by several YouTubers a few years ago, and I wanted to kind of answer a few viewer questions that I had about how I got into orchids and what my background was, how long I've been keeping them, and it was suggested in one of the comments on an Instagram post that I did that the answers to the Orchid Tag actually kind of fed very well into that, so maybe I should do that instead, which I think it was Nina that suggested, so hi Nina, thank you for that. I think that that's a really great idea and I'd really like to get involved with that, so I thought I would answer the questions that have been set out for that as part of like a reintroduction video, and then what I can do is do a separate Q&A where I answer the questions that are more directly orchid specific and answer your guys' questions in that. But this one's going to be more about sort of my background and how I got into orchids, so I hope you guys are interested in that because I find it really interesting hearing about how everyone else got into orchids. So there's a series of questions that are set out which I've printed off and I'm going to go through and answer with you guys. So if we start off with question number 1, which is what part of the world are you growing your orchids in? So I'm living at the moment in a small town on the south coast of the United Kingdom, which is a coastal town, so very close to Bournemouth, Poole, and also the New Forest. So growing on the south coast of England, it's much warmer than up north. I know this because I did my undergraduate degree up in Lancaster and that was freezing compared to down here, so it's much more temperate down here, and also the humidity's higher because we're growing kind of on the coast, so you kind of my humidity even in winter when all the heating is on, it doesn't drop below 50%. I think that is because we are very close to the coast. So it's a lovely part of the country and I'm very lucky to kind of live here. So yeah, that's where I live. I'm growing my orchids in this kind of climate, so it's kind of more temperate and a little bit more humid than other parts of England. So how long have you been growing orchids, and can you remember which was your very first orchid, plus have you still got it? So I've been growing orchids for, I'd say seriously, for around 2 years now, and by seriously I mean like this. But it's sort of dabbled a little bit before that, and I've had Phalaenopsis for a little bit longer. My first orchid was a Phalaenopsis orchid, and let me just see if I can grab them down. So this is my first ever orchid. He's a Harlequin type Phalaenopsis with the kind of mottled white and purple flowers, and I got it in bloom as kind of a 2-leaf. These were the 2 that it had when I got it, orchid, and as you can see, it's turned into quite the big boy there. I still love him. I don't know why it's a him. I was following one of the Roger's Orchids Facebook group posts on assigning genders to orchids, and I love how into it everyone really got about all the technical explanations to why we would call an orchid a him or a her. Mine changed, so sometimes this one's a girl, sometimes this one's a boy, sometimes it's an it. So I don't really have a proper thought process to it, it's just kind of whatever I feel at the time. So yeah, this is my first ever orchid and still alive. I did set him back a few times, but very vigorous orchid and still with me. Obviously I've not been growing that long, so we would hope that I'd probably still have it, but you know, mistakes can happen. What first got me into the orchid growing hobby? So I've always kind of grown up in the outdoors near the New Forest. I love nature, I love animals. I used to keep birds and I used to find that very therapeutic, like during my GCSEs and A-levels. We had aviaries and I loved just going in and relaxing and watching the birds and watching nature kind of happen. And we can't have any pets or anything where we're renting at the moment. I think what really triggered the like obsessive orchid hobby side of my collection was the start of my PhD, really, because I really found that I needed something to come home to and switch off, where I didn't really have a hobby before, I've got to be honest. And when people said like you need a really good work-life balance, I was like, nah, it's fine. I pretty much obsessively go into work, going on bank holidays, Saturdays, and it just got a bit much, and I found that I was turning more and more to orchids to kind of mitigate that a bit and provide that balance. And I can just come up here after work, and even if I've had a bad day, I can just switch off and just spend hours in here looking at all the orchids and watching all their progress. So yeah, I think it was really triggered by kind of work stress, but I think that is, that was the trigger, but I don't think that's going to stop. I think when my PhD's finished, I'm still going to be pretty orchid obsessed. So I think that was just a trigger for it. And what kind of growing space do I have? So I started off just on windowsills in the house, and then filled up all the windowsills and decided to convert our spare bedroom into an orchid room. So yeah, I've converted the spare room into an orchid room, hence the title of this channel. And yeah, I love it. The more orchids that I've got, the more of an ideal environment it seems, because obviously the humidity is increasing the more I'm adding orchids to it. My boyfriend kind of hates that. He says it's like a rainforest up here, but that's what I want. We want to have a rainforest in our homes. So yeah, I just find it super relaxing to come up here and look at them all. And I do still have some growing on windowsills. I filled up this windowsill and the other spare bedroom windowsill as well. It's got my Ringstatus giganteas on. Kitchen windowsill has some dendrobiums. Also have a little greenhouse, which my orchids kind of went into for summer, but it didn't really go so well. Summer in the UK this year has not been that good. So mainly just in the orchid room here that I'm in at the moment. Next question is, how many different types, genre of orchids do you grow, and what are they? So I grow Phalaenopsis, both complex hybrids and species, Oncidiums and Oncidium intergenerics, in which Miltoniopsis would fall, but I'm going to say them separately because we're a little bit fussier. So Miltoniopsis and like intergenerics. What else do I grow? Just looking around. Oh, I've got some Catasetums that I've started off this year. Cattleyas I grow. Encyclias, obviously part of the Cattleya Alliance. Vandas, I've got really into Vandas this year, so I've got quite a lot of Vandaceous orchids. So within that I've got like Vandas, Rhynchostylis, Aerides. Yeah, I think that's kind of it. Angrecums, Angrecoids. I might be missing some here. I've got like a few unusual species that I'm kind of just have one of in my collection, so I'm probably missing things. I've got Neophoenicias as well. I'm not sure whether you kind of want more of a list of just the broad genres or, but yeah, that's kind of what I'm growing at the moment. I think that's everything. I'm probably missing things, let's be honest. Do I actually know how many orchids I have, roughly? No. I try not to count. I'm living in denial at the moment. So I've got, I would say, over 250. Yeah, last count was around 250. So I've probably got more now. I've been doing quite a lot of orchid hauls. Yeah, so over 250 I would say. What would be the one thing that you could say was your top orchid gripe or peeve? So I don't really have many. I would say I've always found it a little bit odd when, like on orchid boards and forums and things, people are very dismissive of different grow methods that maybe they haven't even tried, or they only tried it once with one orchid and it didn't work and they're like, no, it doesn't work, it's a rubbish grow method. Yeah, I would say that people kind of making sweeping statements before they've tried it. I think it's important to not really dismiss an idea or a grow method until you've had a real kind of think about the process, and maybe even tried it out yourself in a few orchids. Until you've done that, I don't think you can really dismiss anybody else's growing conditions or methodology, because everyone's different. Everyone's orchids are growing in a different environment. Us as individuals were very different, and that will affect how we grow our orchids. Obviously environmental conditions are a massive factor, and someone that it doesn't work for in one environment the same grow method can really work well in another environment. So yeah, I think that it's just really important to keep an open mind when we're growing orchids. Yeah, that's I guess my only real gripe that I have. What are your favourite places to buy orchids? So I love Spiceotic Plants in the UK, which is an eBay seller. Mainly because they are based in the UK, so when they have an orchid that I like, they're always really great quality. They ship pretty much the next day after you order, and then you get them the following day. That's a pretty good turnaround. They never get damaged in the post at all, they're packaged really well, and they are just really good quality plants. The only thing recently that I had with them was they held on to a plant for a week saying they wanted to give it an extra quarantine, and I was like, okay, that's fine, I'd rather you quarantined it than I have an orchid with any pests or anything. So they sent it after a week, and I got it and I opened it up and it was just infested with what I thought were spider mites. And I was like, spider mites, kill all the spider mites. And I was showering it off and spraying it down with pesticides, like miticides. And then I was spraying it down with rubbing alcohol, like 3-pronged attack, get rid of all the spider mites. I don't want any spider mites in my grow room, thank you. And I emailed them just to say, oh, just let you know it still had some spider mites on. Quite a lot actually, and just if you've got any orchids that were next to it, you hadn't quite got rid of them, so you might just want to check them. And they were like, no, those were good mites, those were like predator mites. We put them on your plant and for a week, and then we gave it a repeat dose just before we sent it to you, so it was full of good predator mites. Don't kill them, please. And I was like, just killed them. I just killed them all. So yeah, they're a really good seller. That just shows how good they are, that they were going to send me predator mites as a top-up treatment as well, but obviously I killed them, so. But yeah, that was quite a funny story that I had with them recently. I really like them. Outside of the UK, I'm getting quite into eBay sellers, to be honest, because you can see the actual plant that you're buying and you're not paying as much postage, and you can just buy 1 or 2 plants. You don't have to pay £25 postage and think, well, now I have to do a massive haul because I'm paying so much postage. So yeah, I'm getting quite into eBay sellers. What is the worst orchid advice you've ever been given, and did you take that advice? The worst orchid advice. I haven't personally been given much in the way of orchid advice because I've kind of not been putting myself out there that much until recently. The one mainstream piece of orchid advice that I think is both really good and really bad is the don't water your orchid until it's like completely dried out, which is I think a great guideline for beginners to stop people overwatering plants in organic media. Different story for inorganic media completely, so we're not going to get into that here, but I nearly killed a few Nelly Islas when I first got them. The Nelly Islas were the first Oncidium types that I actually got, so yeah, I probably should have started off with something easier, shouldn't I? But yeah, I didn't realise that when the roots of a Miltoniopsis or moisture-loving orchid, intergeneric, dry out, they die. It's not like with a Phalaenopsis where you can dry them out a little bit. So I think that that's advice that's kind of widely given in orchid growing, just to let your plant nearly dry. And actually it doesn't work for all orchids in all environments. So I think that's the one thing that I would say to take with caution, and to just draw your own conclusions based on your growing conditions and your environment and what the orchid is actually telling you. I think any advice that applies for though. So it's not really bad advice, but it did cause me to nearly kill my first Nelly Isla because I let it dry out too much. But it's fine, we have it here in bloom with lots of new growths, so it's okay. We saved it, but yeah, it's a bit of advice to be taken with caution, I think. Out of the orchids you own, which are your 5 favourite orchids? Okay, so number 1, the Nelly Isla. She's just so beautiful and fragrant. Smells like I've got fresh lemons being squeezed and grated all around me. I absolutely love it. So that is probably one of my favourites. So this Nelly Isla is, you know, it's the Swiss Beauty variety. I really like the Red Velvet variety as well. I have that one, but not in bloom at the moment. My Swiss Beauties are synced, my Red Velvet is not, so it'll probably bloom in a few more months. I really like the Phalaenopsis violacea and the Phalaenopsis samira, so I'll take them as 2 separate orchids. They're 2 different One's a hybrid between the Bellina and the Violacea, the Samira, and the other's a species. So I love them. I love primary hybrid Phalaenopsis and species Phalaenopsis because they're super fragrant, and I love the compact kind of waxy nature of the flowers. On that note, the Phalaenopsis Princess Kaolani cross with KS Happy Eagle is absolutely stunning. It's a recent acquisition, but I really love that. Another one of my top favourites would be the Rincostylis Gigantea. I'm a little bit obsessed with the Rincostylis Gigantea. I have it and I have a lot of its hybrids. The fragrance I don't like that much, but the flowers are absolutely stunning, and I love the succulent kind of leaves of the Rincostylis Gigantea. And the Sideria japonica, because of the fragrance of the blooms, it's incredible. But getting it to bloom has been a little bit tricky. I've only had mine in bloom once, and that was after I kind of neglected it a bit over winter. So I think it does need a little bit of a cool down over winter, and I'm going to try this year a little bit harder with it to give it a correct kind of winter rest. I know some people don't seem to need that to get it to bloom, but mine definitely looked a lot better after it had been a bit neglected over winter, so maybe it does need a winter rest. A lot of the literature says if you don't give it a winter rest, if you just keep going through continuous growth cycles, that it will eventually tire itself out and die, and I don't want that happening, so I'm going to try a bit harder with it this year. Is that 5? Close enough, right? There are probably loads more that I could think of. I absolutely love Cattleyas, and I couldn't possibly pick a favourite out of the Cattleyas. So we'll just go with those for now, and that'll probably change. I think the Nellie Isla's got a bit of a permanent place in my top 5 though, because it's so beautiful and a lot more of a regular bloomer for me than the Miltoniopsis themselves. Have you got an orchid related story? Funny, interesting or sad? Not really, other than just how I got into orchids, which was kind of as a stress relief mechanism. I guess sort of kind of a regular story with me at least is I come up here to turn off a light or check an orchid, and I'm in here for like 2 hours, and my boyfriend's got the TV on pause downstairs and is like, what are you doing? Have you been trapped under orchids? Please come down. So yeah, I tend to get distracted by them, especially when I wander in here. I just kind of wander in to look at one thing and end up spending a few hours checking them all out and checking all their growths. So yeah, I've not really got any specific orchid related stories or any kind of sentimental stories with them. Yeah, so not really, unfortunately. What advice would you give someone about to start growing orchids and building up a collection? So I would say to do your research. I've found that since I started really looking into the species composition of hybrids or species through the Orchid Species website, looking at where they're growing in nature, the elevations, and therefore the temperature. If it's high elevation, it'll be a slightly cooler grower usually. That really gives you a lot of cultural information. So I would definitely say to do your research on where they grow in the wild, because that's a massive help in informing you how you can grow a new orchid or a new species or hybrid in your home and the adaptations you can make. I would also say to take guidelines as that, guidelines, and to just listen to what your orchid is telling you, rather than going by a specific set of rules, because sets of guidelines are just that, they are guidelines, and they can differ quite a lot depending on how you're growing your orchid and the environment that you're growing in. So something that works for 90% of people might not work for you. Even if most of your conditions are exactly the same, there might just be that one variable that you've got in your home that they didn't have in theirs that means that that method won't work for you. So yeah, I would just do your research, see how other people are growing that orchid in your environment when you're getting a new orchid. Look at how they're growing in nature, and then kind of use that to inform how you could grow that orchid in your environment, and not to kind of take rules as hard and fast rules, because they are just guidelines. So yeah, I guess that's the only advice that I'd give to someone just starting out. But I've not been growing orchids for that long, as I've said, so you know, I'm sure that there will be other things that come up that I would also suggest. But yeah, that's kind of, I think, the main thing that I found along the way is just to do your research before getting a new orchid home, or if you can't do that, get it home and look up on the orchid species website its parents, or if it's a species, the actual orchid, and see how it's growing in nature and how that can inform how you grow it. So that's been the list of 12 questions from the Orchid Tag list of questions. So I would like to nominate Orchid and Orchid Nerd to participate in the Orchid Tag, and they can answer these questions hopefully. I'd be really interested to hear more about their backgrounds, definitely. So those are the two people I'd like to nominate to complete this. And I will do a separate Q&A another time looking at some of the more orchid directed questions that you guys have asked me specifically, because you asked me some really great questions. So this was more just to answer some of the questions that I kind of had about my background and how I'm growing orchids and things. So I hope that that's been enjoyable and you found this informative. And if you did and want to see more videos from me, then give this video a like or subscribe to my channel for more regular orchid updates. And I will see you guys later. Bye!